I'm honored to share Tiffani Wade's interview with you today. Tiffani and I discussed the experience of being flattened by grief and how, even though we may not think we can make it through a moment, we can. Tiffani shared about her experience of losing her mother and shares some ideas about how we can be more compassionate in the things we say to someone who's grieving. Tiffani Wade embodies an outspoken, honest, and empathetic approach in her work. She has chosen to focus her training in areas often lacking in the wellness industry, and is both an ongoing student of and dedicated advocate for trauma awareness, addiction recovery, body positivity and acceptance, and equity and justice. She has a passion for helping her coaching clients unearth their innate abilities, purpose, and authentic selves. Tiffani is a 200-hour certified yoga teacher, a Y12SR leader, Yoga for All certified, and Accessible Yoga certified. And she's the founder of A Space to Breathe. I hope you enjoy the interview. We met at Citizen Summit in the summer of 2018, I guess, in Boone.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Our friend and comrade Carrie Kelly pulled together a summit of people from all over the country to really help us talk about organizing and political issues and cultural issues going on, and to build community. And so that's when we first met, which was exciting to meet you there. And then you live in Richmond, which is my hometown. So
Yes.
I got to see you recently at a skill and action workshop. So it's been nice to see you on social media between those 2 points, and I hope to see you in person more.
Yes, yes.
So we'll start with a moment of centering and grounding before we dive into the questions. So I invite you to find a comfortable way to be in your body. And I invite folks watching or listening to find a comfortable way to be. You can close your eyes or soften your gaze. And take a moment to turn your attention to your breath. Begin to feel your inhales and exhales. And now begin to deepen and lengthen your breath in your body. And as you deepen and lengthen your breath, just take a moment to notice how you feel. Notice what is present for you. Now bring your awareness to your heart space and your heartbeat, and take a moment to notice what you're holding in your heart right now. What is present in your heart space. And take a few more deep inhales and exhales here. Just breathing and settling in and settling down. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes, just reorienting to the space.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can share a little more about who you are and the work you do in the world, and maybe even why you said yes to this conversation about grief and liberation.
Sure. So I am a yoga teacher. I just launched my website for my integrative emotional coaching business, and that is at a space to breathe.love. And the handle is the same on Instagram, all that fun stuff. I founded Awkward Yoga for Awkward People, which is my yoga space where people can come where they don't think yoga is for them, and to have these bigger conversations, and for it to not be so bypassy and more integrated. And I said yes because I really love these conversations and getting deep and being real and being human and messy and present with each other. It's very vital, and I jump at any chance I get to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for jumping at this chance. And I'm wondering what taught you, or I guess increased your capacity to be in spaces and be with the messy and like be in these conversations about grief and probably many other emotions people don't want to talk about or experiences. Like what taught you how to do that, or who taught you how to do that? Where did that come from?
Well, a lot of it was from finding yoga and having that space with myself of creating the space to feel my own emotions. And then of course all of the grief events I've had in my own life have also really opened me up to noticing that there are things that aren't really being talked about, and that there's no way I'm the only one who feels this way. And then in those moments when I would mention like snippets of things and conversations, or just really having a day where I'm like, I don't have the energy for a mask. I don't. And seeing how that resonated with other people. And they're like, oh, wow, that's, yes, like I feel that, I hear you. And then just really continuing that conversation and seeing how there's such a need for it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And why do you think, given that, like what taught you this, and also what you just shared has to do with giving permission to other folks to express their feelings too, like through expressing your feelings versus denying them, right, or covering them up. It gives people permission to do the same. So why do you feel like now, just this political, cultural moment, why it's important to talk about grief, and if it resonates, to talk about liberation, or to practice grieving and liberation?
So I feel that there is just this big elephant in the room, and like even on our chests, and I feel that it's grief. And I feel that it is on everyone's mind, and there is a collective crisis right now that really just needs to be named. And Amber Carnes says vocalize to normalize. And I love that saying so much because I feel that it's vital. And it's important to surpass that point at which in grief you get the, oh, you're not over that yet, or everything happens for a reason, don't you know that? And to really continue the conversation, and not just with those who get it, to really find comfort in that discomfort with yourself, and if someone is in front of you, and to really witness the grief and the pain, because we all have it on some level, because it's not all big, it's not all capital G grief, I like to call it, you know, the deaths. It's daily things, it's graduating school, it's, you know, a friendship or relationship ending or shifting, it can be a number of things. And I feel that it is becoming a little more okay for people to be human. And the response to that has been more of these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what do you feel like just at this point in your life, like this moment, what do you feel like you're grieving? Or like you can answer it personally, you can also answer it collectively depending on what feels comfortable for you. But what do you feel like you're grieving at this time?
Mm. Oh man. So much. um, what is currently coming up is, I think that my biggest grief that I handle on a daily basis is in 2016, in early 2016, my stepfather passed away to ALS. And later in the year, my mother passed away. And in divine timing, I actually found yoga the year before. So thanks to those practices and those tools that I had cultivated, I was really able to be with my grief. And it is absolutely something that is with me constantly. It's not, I'm navigating the world without my mother, my best friend. That's not something that you just get over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as heavy as it once was. And it's something that's always present. And I've noticed that with the tools that yoga has given me, I have been able to have the discernment in my healing process of when I'm actively seeking suffering, of when I'm looking to watch videos or like listen to her voicemails to like truly hurt myself, and to
Mm-hmm.
really be able to meet that with compassion and reel it back in a little and be a little kinder to myself around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that with me and with the folks who are listening to this. I'm also part of what struck me in what you said is that this grief is with you, or loss is with you all of the time, right? This experience of loss. And I'm wondering if you, because you said being human is becoming a little easier for us culturally, as humanity is doing all of the things it's doing. I'm wondering what grief you carry with you related to just how you feel about what's going on in your community or state or the country, like, or the world, right? However you want to talk about it.
Yeah. I actually was having a coaching call with my most recent coach, Emily Ballard, and I was talking with her about how I was feeling in regards to my son going to a brick and mortar school this year, and how terrified I was for so many reasons. And the main one was his safety. And in talking through that with her, I just started bawling. And she named it. She was like, this is grief. Like you are grieving for the country in this time of what is happening with all of this heartbreaking school shootings. And that is something that is amongst so many other things, but that one is what's coming up for me right now. That is a really big grief for me that I carry around and think of constantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was interviewing someone else who's part of this summit, and she's a parent. She has 2 kids, and she was talking about raising kids at this time. And I'm not a parent. I have a connection with children, but I didn't birth children, and I don't have them in my life as far as me parenting them. So I'm not always conscious of what parents might be holding on to, because I don't have that experience. of course, I'm deeply concerned about the world, but I don't have the experience of like having a child and having to explain this to them, like what's going on.
Mm.
So just, how do you explain what is happening? And you can specify it related to the school shootings or anything else, but how do you navigate that with your child?
So my answer is that I haven't faced this head on with him yet. He has high anxiety and was really nervous about starting school in general. So I haven't tacked this on because that would just be way
Mm-hmm.
too much for him currently. So it's been more of just having these really raw conversations about being kind to people. And, we also talk about the fact that he's a white male and what that looks like in these spaces, and really trying to, I'm a big lecturer. So my partner often has to reel me in because I'm like
Mm-hmm.
gone off on a tangent. My son is done glazed over. He is not listening to anything I'm saying. And so I have to pay attention and be like, okay, smaller words. um, so really just trying to take it one thing at a time and
Mm-hmm.
like find the teachable moments in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I feel it just goes whoosh, and then sometimes he'll say something back to me and I'm like, you were listening.
Mm-hmm.
You were listening. And so, because it's so daunting to be someone who is paying attention to everything and raising a human. And it's, raising a child, period, is so much. And then being like, okay, I need to teach you about consent and, your role as a male in this society, male presenting as of now at least.
Mm-hmm.
And, all of these other big things. And he's only 9. I have some time. So,
Yeah.
but it's, so to circle back to the direct about his safety, I take it one day at a time and really just, because that's all I can do, or else I will curl up in a ball in a corner and probably never leave my house.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think that's sometimes that's all we can do. It's like day by day or moment by moment to really hone in on what the moment's calling for, right? And to also
Yes.
discernment, like to practice really being with the context and what's happening, and then what makes sense to say or do in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
that feels like a useful practice probably in parenting, but in relationship, or how we respond to what's going on in the world and our culture as well. Like when we can take a moment to practice discernment and then take action, that I feel like that is being an act of being more mindful in response to things that feel very urgent.
Mm.
And certainly your son's safety is, and our safety, right, is urgent. It's an urgent concern. So thank you for sharing some about your son and just what you do, how you navigate parenting and this
Mm.
idea of day by day, moment by moment. So I'm curious to know, because you've mentioned a few different experiences of grief, and I'm curious to learn more about lessons that you've learned from grief or loss. What lessons have come forth in response to or as a result of loss?
Mm. I have learned that our culture and these humans in our culture just really have no idea what to do with any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's been this grasping at how it looks and like bing bing bing, this is how it goes, and if you're not here by this certain time then you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's helped me to be a little kinder around it, and bring a little bit more empathy into the situation, even if someone says, I heard so many things after my mom passed that I had to literally bite my tongue so I wasn't just screaming at people. Um, and, to really just, people are uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. And showing up and just being there is so uncomfortable for people. And oftentimes I found for me that that's truly all I need in those moments, is to just be reminded I'm not alone, and that I really don't need the platitudes and, to fill the silence, because you can't fix this. You can't fix it. You can't rush it. And there is no magical thing to say. And I get that that's really hard. It's very, very hard. And it's taught me that I can also survive those moments of, the devastation and heaviness, and being able to feel my heart literally breaking into a million pieces. That I will eventually get off the bathroom floor at some point, and I will be able to live with my grief. I'm not getting over it. And it will get different, and that time will not heal it. So I've learned that all of those great cliches you hear are bullshit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And probably people's ways of trying to understand what happened, even though we can't really understand some of the losses we experience in life. People try to reason with it and make sense of it. And while death is part of life, we know that we can't make sense of, like, when it happens unexpectedly, or when someone's ill and they pass away, or, or a child passes away. Like, we can't, there's no way to make sense of that. And so people say things and do things to try to have some structure around it, right? Which is, it's kind of false. And I think it's coping too. It's like people trying to cope.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I appreciate what you said about just being with it, though. Like, that's coping too. And you also mentioned, what I heard is resilience in there. Like, I'm going to get off the bathroom floor at some point, right? I'm going to move through this with it, right? Maybe not through it, but I'm going to move with it, which I think is important for people to remember, related to their own individual losses, and also to the culture and what's going on. Like, we have to show up anyway, and be in our resilience as we feel devastated or despaired about what's going on around us, or what's happening to us based on our identities. So I appreciate the reminder to be with this. Are there rituals or practices you engage to be with grief and to remind yourself of your resilience?
Yes. Meditation is definitely a big part of my healing, and really being able to get in touch with what's going on, where I am, what's coming up, what needs a little bit more attention, and what's really tugging. That's like, hi, I'm here. I really need you to pay attention to me. And I also talk. That's, been the most healing thing, is to just continue having these conversations and speaking honestly and authentically about what's going on. And it's so interesting how often I'll say something, like I mentioned earlier, and I'll say it to someone I'm not super close with, but that we say in my circle all the time. And it just rocks their world entirely. Like, people talk about this. I'm like, yes, they do. These conversations can happen. And it's so essential. And just making space for however it looks. and really letting go of the shoulds has been very instrumental for my healing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was in another interview, a person was talking about grief, and she works with people who are moving through grief and loss quite a bit, and people who are transitioning, so passing on. And she talked about, like, you know, when we lose someone or something, it's like the time we can be like, actually, I don't want to show up for dinner with you, or I do, and then I'm going to leave 10 minutes later, or actually, like, I don't want to show up for work today because I actually need space to take care of myself, which I know is not always an option for people. But she was naming these things that I feel like were like, this is the time you get to really tend to your emotions if you're able to. And I just, it makes me, you just think about what it would be like to have space to do that all of the time, because we're grieving all of the time, right? We're just like,
Yes.
that's what we're doing. So to give people agency around how they take care of themselves in response to everything that's coming at them and everything that's going on. Because part of what I think perpetuates harm and oppression is that we actually don't have permission and space to say, I actually don't, this is not aligned anymore. I don't want to show up for it, right? Or I don't want to get out of bed today. I need to actually nurture myself by sleeping all day, or I need people to come over and take care of me, you know?
Yes.
I don't think there's enough of that. There's not enough room for that to happen. So that what you just named about talking, and earlier what you named about vocalize to normalize, right? That we need to be in a practice of actually making space for people to do what they need to do, given that we're living at this time and so much is coming at us.
Yeah, and I really feel that it comes back to this community aspect that's kind of almost been lost, I feel. And that is where I feel we come together and are able to notice when these things are happening within our communities of, okay, so where can we show up for this person or these people and really help where, you know, help the balls, all of them that are in the air, and support one another during these times. And I really feel like that is where the conversation can be in the yoga spaces, and where it needs to be, not even can, it needs to be, you know, vital. And because that's community. And Sean Korn spoke to this so beautifully in her book, where she mentioned how she had been using her breath to bypass her emotions. And I felt personally attacked. Like, it was, that hit me. I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought about that as being a way of bypassing, instead of using it as integration, and instead of using our practice as escapism. And I feel that is what's lacking in the yoga community, is the integration, instead of, you know, all right, we're going to come here, we're going to cut the phones off, we're going to be on our mat, nothing else is going on outside of this room until you leave this room. And then where you just want to go hide back in the room. Like, you there's no living the yoga off the mat. That's so vital to help create this ripple effect to everyone around you, if it's just staying contained in this small area. And it's also vital to start with you. I think that's also very important. However, please don't stop there. Like, that's not where it stops.
That's right. Yeah. And I think you're right. People usually enter into this practice, a spiritual practice, and in particular yoga, for personal transformation. And what you're offering is that it has to be, start there, and it has to be bigger, right? Expand out from that place of just self, right? And ego and what's going on for you. And the idea that yoga spaces or wellness spaces or spiritual spaces, right, are spaces where we can sit with what is real, right? We can sit with what we're grieving. And I think the reason I'm calling this Healing in Community a summit on grief and liberation is because I think the only way for us to get free, right? The only way for us to arrive there is to move through what we're talking about. And if there's never space made for that, especially in spaces like yoga spaces that can hold it, then what are we doing, right? We actually can't be free unless we are reckoning with, sitting with, contemplating, working with the things that break our hearts. And grief is certainly a response to something breaking our hearts. So I appreciate what you named about that, and the idea that healing and moving through grief can happen in community, in a culture that really says, get over it, right? Do it in isolation. And you have 3 days to do it.
Yes. See you on Monday. Like, it's
right.
And, I would really, this might be a stretch, but I would really love for that, that paradigm we have of, being a robot in our culture and, our capitalistic society, and any sign of humanness is like, are you okay? Like, I would really love to see that completely, like, woo,
Yeah.
Let's all be human. And if someone's starting to do robot-like behavior, you're like, excuse me, what's going on?
Right.
Like, that is really what these conversations are moving towards. And I get that's a big ask. And I really feel that this is just chipping away, like that it's getting there through these conversations, through these summits that you're doing, really bringing these conversations and holding the space to give the permission to be a human. We're humans. And that's where I hope to see this someday.
Yeah, I love that, flipping that, like normalizing being human, right? So humanize people. And, interrupting or intervening when people are doing things that are rote or like robotic, as you said, and not really connected to emotion or their humanness. I think that's a beautiful way of thinking about what needs to shift. And so I'm wondering if you have anything else you want to share about what it might look like in this culture to prioritize spaces for us to grieve. You just named a way that we could do that, and for us to find freedom or liberation. Like what does that look like on a cultural level or collective level?
It looks like showing up would be the first thing that's coming, is to be able to show up authentically and real and raw, and knowing that that's okay, and without fear, and to speak to the pain. I know I keep saying that because it's very important. And because it the conversations really help in bridging the loneliness and the devastation that can come with all of the grief. And it also looks like paid mental health days and doing away with the perfect attendance nonsense, right. And rewarding working 120 hours a week, and having more access to counseling, and also helping educate those in counseling roles or leadership roles and how grief looks really. And I learned recently from a book I was reading that grief can be diagnosed if it's longer than like 2 weeks after the fact. And that blew my mind. I was like, whoa, that's not normal.
Right.
And here's a little story. So I picked my son up from school last week, and when I was checking him out or they check IDs and all that fun stuff. And the woman who took my ID asked if, I was his mom, and I was like, yes. And she was like, he got upset in class today. I'm his music teacher. And I was like, oh, okay. And my mind immediately went to, he got really mad about something because we have big feelings in our family.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, he started crying actually. And I was like, oh, okay. And she said, apparently his grandmother passed away a few years ago. And, you know, he thought about her and he got sad. And, you know, I told him to just not think about it. And I was like, okay, thank you for letting me know.
Mm-hmm.
So we get in the car and we get down the road a little, and I was like, hey, so, you know, this happened, and I was wondering, are these the words that she said to you? And he said, yes. So I collected myself because I thought maybe she was just paraphrasing what happened,
right,
hoping that was what happened. And so I went on to tell him that I was sorry that happened,
mm-hmm.
and that being sad and feeling grief can be very uncomfortable for other people, and they don't know what to do. And a lot of the time that response is to shut you down. Mm-hmm. So it's just done. And I want you to know that that's not how we do things in our family and how I want the world to look. So if that happens again and you feel as though you're not being heard, I would like for you to please go to the guidance office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was like, okay. I was like, okay. But I was blown away, not even kind of, because I haven't been involved in the school system since I was in school. So
right.
it was just kind of a whole like, wow. And I also understand that in this particular situation, teachers have a lot going on. There's a lot of kids mm-hmm. in the class, and mm-hmm. you know, there's a curriculum, and I completely get that. And about the same amount of time, it could have been held, and it could right. have been validated. And that is so important with our children, and not just the little ones we have, but like our little ones, of like when that happened to us mm-hmm. growing up. And mm-hmm. that's helped to build these stories of where we are now of, no, we don't talk about it. That brief moment when someone's like, how are you? And you go to like answer, and then you're like, oh, nope, let's bring that back in and just say, I'm fine. And that's where it all starts, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's so much in there about, so much happened when the teacher said, don't think about it, right? There's like the other children hearing that and learning about feelings. There's your son learning about feelings and what's okay to express and what's not. And sometimes it's different based on our identities, right? But she may have said that to anyone. I mean, I don't know what the teacher would have said. And this idea that we're inviting people to shut down their feelings from a very young age. And had you not had the conversation about, well, actually, you can feel what you're feeling. And if you do and need support, go to the guidance counselor. It may have been a moment where your son learned, I can't express, sadness is not okay to express, right? Thinking about my grandmother is not okay for me to think about. And when I do, I just need to like deny that that's happening. And I think so many harmful behaviors come from that. And it's toxic to tell people they can't feel. Like, you shouldn't feel this. You should only be happy. Because had he been like, I'm thinking about my grandma and I'm happy and I remember this time, the teacher would not have said, don't think about that.
Yeah.
Right now. Mm-hmm. So it's like we're saying these feelings are okay, these feelings are not. And then there, you named the book that you were reading, and this idea that it's only grief if it lasts for 2 more weeks. Like, culturally, that we have these ideas around what's grief, what is it, what qualifies as grief, what doesn't, right? How long do you have to feel it? When are you supposed to be over it? That there are systems in place pathologizing our process of grief instead of normalizing it. And naming that all of us experience grief. If we're moving on the planet in any way, like we're navigating this time in these bodies, we're experiencing grief, personal and cultural grief. So I appreciate you sharing that story, because I think there's so many lessons in there, and I think it's helpful for people to hear. to then think about, how do I talk to my children or my friends or my beloveds about their feelings, especially when they're expressing grief or sadness? And how do I want to talk to them? And how do I want to hold space for that if I'm able to, or connect them with resources that can?
Yes.
I'm glad you shared that. So I'm also, I want to go back to resilience. And because I named earlier in response to what you said that, you know, you're resilient, you're moving with your grief, right? It's happening, and sometimes it's likely more intense than others, and you're still moving with it. So what does, my question is really about collective liberation, because we're talking about grief, but you can answer it related to your own resilience and what has reminded you of your resilience. And then perhaps tie that to like, what collective liberation mean for me? You've named some ways that we could create it, actually, and some strategies and skills we can employ. But if there's anything else you want to name about resilience and liberation, I'd love to hear more.
So there's a very I'm not quite sure if this is exactly related to your question, and I would like to say it.
Yes.
So as I know you're familiar with, there is a lot of shame and grief that come up with white people, specifically white women, I've found, when they are starting to learn about what's going on. It's always been here, but what's going on in our society, our culture, what we were founded on, and that they're constantly causing harm and learning of their racist roots and comments, and having all of the centering and the fragility and the tears that come up around that, and then really taking that and making it shame and guilt and just keeping it in, and like, well, I can't do anything right at all ever. I can't say anything. Everyone's mad at me, and I'm just not going to say anything.
Right.
And I really feel there's space for that. Like that is important, and not to be done with people of color. If anyone is watching this who does not have a fellow white person to talk to, email me, please. I'm here for it. But to take that and to make it the catalyst towards the change, to help bridge the gaps, use it as momentum to keep the conversation going, and to know that we're gonna fuck it up. We're gonna mess up. We're across the board, not just, I mean, I'm specifically talking about racism, but we're gonna mess it up. It's gonna be messy. You're gonna say something, it's gonna come out wrong, or, you know, whatever might happen, and to acknowledge it and to offer an apology and to genuinely see if there was anything else that you missed that caused harm and what you can do to correct that from what happened and moving forward. And that is just like the smallest step, I feel, into helping move that really big conversation forward and into more conversations.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're naming about you're racializing this and naming things around what you've seen white women do, and or how whiteness functions really and centers itself. And then that becomes a bypass, and it also becomes a way to evade any responsibility to make change if people are just in their shame and guilt about their privileged identities. That's not actually helping the people who are being oppressed by their privilege. And it leads me to a question that is not one that is on the list, but it's because 3 white women have asked me about white tears. And I want to, it relates to what you just said. I want to I'm one who wants to make space for emotion, and I'm very well aware of the dynamic you just named. So I have boundaries about that.
Mm,
And I'm not one to say it's bad for white women to express emotion, because I actually think all of us should be crying about what's going on, or whatever
yes,
we do to grieve, right? Shedding
right.
tears in response to everything that's going on. I think that it makes sense. We need to do more of that. What you're naming is that we need to be discerning about where we do that,
Yes.
right? And where those emotions are expressed. And ultimately, I think there are spaces where we can do it together and across
Mm,
difference, and there are other times where it's not appropriate to do that. And then there are all
yes.
these times where it's unpredictable. We don't know what's gonna arise. So I just was curious about how you think about that, like centering grief given what's going on, um, and everything that you like. How can we make space for grief but also not replicate systems of harm? The one you were just naming was racism or whiteness or white supremacy. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Mm. I I truly love, and I don't know what this would look like on like a larger scale or even more regular, but what happened at the Citizen Summit when they did the White Caucus, like that,
Mm-hmm.
like I had never been in a space like that in particular before, and I loved it, not just for us obviously, but for the people of color to be able to have their space and not have to worry about saying anything, or having a white person then take white tears. They
Mm-hmm.
say something, they start crying, and then they did the harm to the person who expressed the thing, and and then it's all focused on them and the
Mm-hmm.
person who, you get what I'm saying. I feel like I'm going in a loop. um, and um, I feel like those kinds of situations are important, and I feel that it is, I keep saying vital and vital, to have a space of fellow white people in this work that you can go to with these things.
Mm-hmm.
That person that you can call to say, I think I'm having a white issue. Like, I think I'm not seeing
Mm-hmm.
things clearly. This is coming up. And like, I've had to do it. I almost commented on a post one day of not all white people. I was like, wait a minute, let me call my person. And she was like, no, they're right. All white people. And let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
this. And that is so important, because through those conversations, I have been able to become more discerning in the situations where it is not, where it is more
Mm-hmm.
um, integrated. Everyone's together in a room and things are happening, and I've been able to be more aware of what's going on around me
Mm-hmm.
and how my actions directly affect everyone else in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and to be very cognizant to not center myself, and to be aware if any other white person in the room were to do the same thing, to be able to go and like try and head it off, or to ask the person that they've cut off if they are okay,
Mm-hmm.
whatever might be needed in the moment, because I just
Mm-hmm.
went through like 3-4 different scenarios. um did that answer your question? I feel like I just went all over the place with that.
No, I think it did. I mean, you're really talking about discernment again, and um, which I think is a skill, people have to learn, coupled with what you're talking about is location, so your identities, right? And so, what does right action look like in this moment? And I don't mean perfect action. I just mean right action. Like, what does it look like in this moment, with an awareness that it's going to be messy. And there's also an understanding in what you're saying that whiteness has taken up a lot of space. And I think that's one of the reasons we're grieving, right? It's just one out of many, actually, but the way that it functions, or systems of dominance function, and what they take away from us. So you're naming some skills, which people always want tools that you can practice, right? or at least think about. I mean, I think you're also raising consciousness for people who may not be aware. And the other thing I think you're naming is that there isn't one right way. And which I think is important for people to understand if we actually want to create liberation. Like, I don't know what it means for other people, right? And there's not one right way to create this collective experience of liberation, because self-determination is key in that. Awareness of social location is important. Awareness of how we're using our power and how we're taking up space. So I think it totally answered my question, because I don't think, the question around white tears being okay or not is not a yes or no answer for me. It's like, well, it depends on the context and the moment and what's going on.
Yeah. And I also feel it, I agree with you that it is okay to cry. And I think that you can cry and not make it about you. Like you can cry, and if anyone shifts their focus to you, you can say, I'm okay.
Right.
Or, leave the room or whatever you might need. So, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Because I think it will create more grief and less liberation if people continue to get the message your son got about don't think about it, don't feel it. Especially if they experience privilege. I think that's dangerous to do. And what you're saying is, well, you can feel it and be responsible with that. Like, leave the room or let people know that you're fine. You don't actually need to take the resources from people in the room who are being oppressed. So I think it's important to just talk about this and for people to contemplate this and their own emotions. Because I would hate for people to think that it's not okay to feel. Because all conversation is about feeling, right?
Yes.
Everything else, like who we are and what messages we've got about feeling, and how do we use our feelings, right? And when we feel uncomfortable, do we use our feelings to shut stuff down, or do we want everyone to pay attention to us and we forget other people's pain or collective pain? So I love what you said about it.
And that's one thing I've tried to teach my son in school is if because I don't feel that he's too young to have the conversation of where he is. I don't. It's been slightly challenging to find the words to make it make sense, because I've said things sometimes and he'll repeat it back to me and I'm like, whoa, that was really not what I said. Let me try that again. Is that if he notices these things that are happening, that he will be listened to more, unfortunately. And you need to go tell someone and check in with the person that this is happening to. Make sure that they are okay. Because his reaction is, I'll yell at the person doing the thing. I'm like, don't do that. They don't need attention. Pay attention to the person who is being harmed.
Right.
And be with them and see how they are.
That's right.
And that is a very simple concept that he picked up on very quickly. So when I was able to get out of my own way and like, okay, he, that for anyone who might be trying to find ways to have that particular conversation with their kids, that was a very simple way to break it down for him.
Yeah, and such an important teaching and offering for him. So is there anything you want to share about what's coming up for you in the new year? Any things you want us to know about, or people listening or watching to know about as far as your work and upcoming events?
Yeah, so I am not quite sure what I'm doing next year. I know it's going to be a big year. That much I know. I can feel it. And the best place to keep up with that would be my Instagram, to follow at A Space to Breathe Out Love. And that's where all of my exciting things will be posted.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll definitely be following that, and all of your information about your social media handles and also website will be in the notes with this recording, so people will know how to find you and follow up with you. And I just want to honor you and thank you for being in this conversation with me, and for doing the work that you do around the breath and around people talking about grief and how they're feeling. And I love your shirt, your feelings are valid. So all the work you do to get us into our feelings, right? And to
Mm.
help us practice being with them. So thank you for joining me today. It was good to see you.
It was great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.